We've all heard the horror stories. A home remodel that drags on for months, jobs that never get finished, or projects that fall apart right after you pay the bill. Consumer advocates say every year home repair complaints are among the most common. Senior investigator Rebecca Lindstrom looks at why finding the right contractor or handyman can be so tough.
That doesn't touch a lot. I honestly felt red flags immediately.
Eve Overland says from now on, she is going to trust her gut. She is rebuilding her DeKalb County deck. First, she hired Richard Bonacore with Echelon Restoration. $28,000, and months into a project she felt was filled with flaws, she fired him and started over.
These guys have done more work in 4 days than Richard did in almost 4 months.
Upset, Overland started to research Bonacore, growing more frustrated with each lawsuit and complaint in this box. There is a termination letter on another project after that homeowner says she didn't get the materials purchased. That is similar to what Craig Hills says he experienced.
For the longest time, that house was a very dark place for me to go.
In 2012, Hill says he hired Bonacore to build a house at Lake Oconee.
We cleared the land. We put the walls in for the basement.
Months later, he was part of a lawsuit because the lumber payments were missing. We asked Bonacore about these accusations.
Have you ever stolen money from a construction project?
No, never have.
Bonacore insists money never went missing. And as for poor workmanship...
You didn't let me finish. I think this job here would have looked very similar to that at that point.
We talked with Bonacore at a current porch project. A good job at one house, a horror story at another. This is why homeowners say it is so hard to know who to hire. Some start to verify a business on the state's corporation search, but Deputy Secretary of State Matthew Tizer says this tool is more about legal status. The information provided is collected, not vetted.
98% of it is an administrative process.
And it has nothing to do with whether a company is operating ethically. There is a contractors licensing board, but not all construction jobs require a professional license.
Things such as swimming pools, roofing, installing a fence, those kinds of things are not required to be licensed in Georgia.
The licensing board says it does have complaints related to Bonacore, but they either couldn't be substantiated or the work didn't require a license. Executive Director LaTrenda Tyler says that means the board didn't have the authority to act.
That is probably 60% of our complaints, or people who are requesting restitution financially.
According to Tyler, Bonacore should have had a license to build this deck. He didn't, so Overland is watching to see what happens. But even if it issues a cease and desist order, Tyler admits holding a contractor to it may be up to the public.
I don't understand why there's no checks and balances.
In this situation, we've uncovered the checks really fall to you, the consumer. Check for licenses and lawsuits. Get references and see the projects for yourself. Search online for reviews and make sure you are okay with what would end up in this box before you hire.
A lot of responsibility on the person driving it, on each person. What prompted you, Rebecca, to look into this in the first place?
You can imagine we get so many emails and phone calls from people who are just frustrated. They feel like there is so little accountability when projects do go wrong. And the reality is, as we're discussing, they're right. So the job, whether big or small, really does fall to you. But just as frustrating is the research process, as we were talking about there at the end. Just trying to figure out how you research one of these contractors, it's not always so obvious.
What do you mean by that in terms of what should be obvious and what is not?
Yeah, so you heard from Eve Overland. She wasn't aware that the state even required a job like building a deck to be done by someone who is licensed. And admittedly, she didn't ask. And in this case, Richard Bonacore never claimed to have a license. And when I asked him about the qualification requirement, he also seemed as surprised. So just figuring out if the contractor should have a license for the job is step number one. And then there's the disagreement over the work. She says it was terrible and she had to start over. He says, well, she was jumping to conclusions before the job was even done.
we immediately saw a bow in the frame, right? And I took a picture and I said, hey, there is a bow in the frame. And then he likes to, it's a favorite excuse is it's not done. You know, once we finish it, we'll take that bow out. If you look at any other deck or porch, there's always going to be a bow in everything because wood is a natural material. Okay, so he can explain away everything, but that doesn't take away the bow in the deck. It did kind of subside. He was able to fix it, but that was a red flag.
I'm sure there are plenty of people who could build a great deck that aren't licensed. But again, if you want some protections when hiring someone for a job that big, that search alone could have steered her toward a different contractor. Jobs like this one also often require a local permit that comes with an inspection and the assurance that the job was done properly.
It's confusing though, because isn't it true that at one point this contractor did have a license?
He did. Bonacori, we were able to confirm, did have a license until 2014 when he let it lapse. LaTrenda Tyler with the Secretary of State's office says she talks with contractors all the time who feel like, well, if they had it once, they don't need to go through the process to renew it later. But that license comes with proof the person is bonded and at least at the time of getting the license has their finances in order. It does appear he tried to work under someone else's license for a while. That is called a qualifying agent, but it is unclear what the relationship was between him and the person who had that license. I asked Tyler if that was legal, and here's her response.
There can be subcontractors that help with those projects, but ultimately that licensed qualifying agent is responsible, or if it's just an individual, they are responsible for the outcome, the successful performance of anyone they bring in to work on that project for which they have pulled their permits for and they've signed contracts to complete. It is on that QA, what we call QA.
But the idea is that you are working with that qualifying agent on a specific project.
Right.
Not that you're kind of running off and doing your own business, but just claiming that license in order to say you're a licensed contractor.
Rebecca, what if a job doesn't require a license, for example?
Many of them don't.
And you've seen a contractor maybe do some good work at some point. You gave some great tips within your story, but what would you say is also important for people to know? Anything else that they could check out before they put this much money into something that could be this frustrating?
Right, and chances are if it is that much money, it probably requires a license. Or another good tool is if it's a safety element, you know, like a porch or something, probably also going to require a license, and the Secretary of State does have a listing of all the different things that do and don't require a license. But I know a lot of people, they read online reviews, and so I tell people if you have a good or bad experience, well, it is helpful to leave one, and especially, again, those good ones. We always think to go and write the bad review, but a good review can be just as helpful. That way people know whether things went really well or really poorly. Another tool I don't think people consider is the court. Right now, if something does go wrong, this is generally going to be considered a civil matter. So police will tell you you're going to have to file a lawsuit. And that is where online tools like Research Georgia and Peach Court can help. Those are two different websites. And those web pages, you can search for filings in multiple counties, but you should also then look at the court website for your county and the county where the business is based to see if anything else pops up, because not every jurisdiction are using those statewide tools. So Research Georgia and Peach Court, you can at least see, have people filed lawsuits? Did they win judgments or were they dismissed? You know, just because you file doesn't mean that it's true or going to be accurate as in the eyes of the law. So,
and that's
but it's another
helpful.
tool.
Like it's helpful. Like you're helping us know like where do you start.
Right.
And I know we're focused on the kind of issue overall here to find a good contractor, but did Bonacori say anything else about the problems he had with customers?
Again, he insisted that there were not any problems, that customers just didn't understand the process. He did admit that for several years, major life changes and addiction impacted his job performance. And I asked him how he would advise someone to hire a contractor. And he said it's really important to see the person's work in real life, especially and older projects so that you can see how it has stood the test of time. He also says if you do all of this research and then you find some things that maybe are questionable, but you like the contractor, ask them about it, give them a chance to explain.
What I would say is there's several sides to, or two sides to every story, at least two. And, you know, I may not feel that what they're saying is what actually how it played out. You know, if I was stealing or if I was taking people's funds intentionally and spending them on myself or going on elaborate vacations, which I've seen in the news quite a few times, where are those vacations?
All right, where does it all stand now?
Well, Eve has hired the other company. The deck's being rebuilt. So as far as her project, she is moving forward.
All right, important conversations for homeowners. Thank you so much.
If you have a tip for Rebecca Lindstrom and the 11Alive Investigates team, call us at 404-873-9111 or email investigates@11alive.com. All calls and correspondence will be kept confidential.